Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where far too often people are made to feel like they need to change who they are just to be accepted, like their emotions are too loud, their dreams too big, their love too intense. Maybe you've been told you're too much. Maybe someone made you feel like your best qualities were actually flaws. But what if the issue was never you? What if the problem wasn't what you were offering, but who you were offering it to? Tonight, I want to talk to the part of you that's ever been misunderstood, silenced, or made to feel small, because the right people will celebrate what others criticized, and it's time to start believing that. When someone makes you feel like you're asking for too much, it's easy to internalize that as a reflection of your own value. You start to question whether you're too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding. You wonder if maybe you really are expecting too much from people. But what often gets overlooked is that the way someone responds to your needs, your emotions, or your presence says far more about them than it does about you. A person's inability to meet you emotionally doesn't mean you're broken. It means they might not be emotionally available, capable, or even willing to engage at the level you're reaching for. But when you're not careful, you take their silence, their inconsistency, or their rejection as some kind of verdict on your worth. You assume that because they didn't step up, it must be because you weren't worth stepping up for. This is the trap. Believing that someone else's lack of readiness, effort, or emotional depth means that you're somehow too much or not enough. It doesn't. Their limitations are theirs to carry, not yours to explain away. Someone who hasn't done the work to understand their own emotions isn't going to know how to hold space for yours. Someone who fears intimacy will label your vulnerability as overwhelming. Someone who avoids accountability will accuse you of being controlling just because you asked for consistency, and in all of that, it's so easy to forget that their reaction isn't a mirror of your value, it's just a snapshot of their capacity. Sometimes people operate from fear, from ego, from past wounds they haven't healed. When you bring truth and honesty into the conversation, it threatens their comfort zone, they push back, they retreat. They deflect, and when that happens, your instinct might be to shrink, to become smaller, quieter, easier, but that only teaches you to betray your own needs for the sake of keeping someone who's not even meeting them in the first place. The truth is, it's not your job to be more palatable for someone who hasn't yet learned how to digest authenticity. It's not your role to carry both your emotional needs and their emotional resistance. And it's certainly not your responsibility to lower your standards just because someone else can't rise to meet them. So often, the people we feel the most drawn to are the ones who reflect back parts of ourselves we hope to heal. We chase approval from those who withhold it. We cling to those who confuse us. We feel the urge to prove our worth to someone who doesn't even see it. But no matter how much effort you pour in, you cannot convince someone to give you what they've never had the capacity to give themselves. When you ask for honesty and someone gives you silence, that's not about your ask being wrong. It's about their ability to communicate being limited. When you ask for effort and someone gives you excuses, that's not because you're expecting too much. It's because they're offering too little. When you show up with your full heart and someone runs from it, that isn't a sign you need to love less. It's proof they never knew how to receive love in the first place. We're so quick to internalize rejection as a message about our flaws. We assume if they left, there must be something unlovable about us, but sometimes people walk away not because they see too much in you, but because they see parts of themselves they don't want to face. Your honesty highlights their avoidance. Your depth exposes their shallowness. Your emotional maturity reminds them of the growth they haven't done. And in that moment, the most important thing you can remember is that your worth is not up for debate just because someone else failed to recognize it. Their limitations don't subtract from your value. Their inability to meet your needs doesn't make those needs unreasonable, and their absence doesn't mean you were undeserving of presence. It's not your job to shrink for anyone. It's your responsibility to stand firm in who you are and to keep your heart open, not for those who run from it, but for those who will meet it where it lives. There comes a point in life, sometimes gradually, sometimes suddenly, when you begin to notice how often you've made yourself smaller just to fit into a relationship that didn't have room for your voice, to fit into friendships that only supported you when you were quiet, agreeable, easy to manage, to fit into environments where being confident felt like arrogance and showing emotion felt like weakness. And slowly, almost without realizing, you start to fold parts of yourself away. You lower your standards to avoid being called demanding. You silence your opinion to avoid conflict. You minimize your success to keep others comfortable. You laugh off disrespect so you're not seen as too sensitive. You keep your dreams to yourself because others might not believe in them. And deep down, you fear that if they don't, maybe you shouldn't either. This is what shrinking looks like, and it doesn't always feel like a dramatic betrayal of the self. Sometimes it feels like being polite, like keeping the peace, like being easy to love, but over time that quiet shrinking becomes suffocating. You start to lose touch with the shape of your own identity. You become so used to folding that standing tall feels like rebellion. But here's the thing, being too much for the wrong environment doesn't mean you're wrong. It means the environment was too small. There are people who are only comfortable with you as long as you don't outgrow them, as long as you don't challenge their world, as long as you don't ask for more than they're used to giving. So, when you begin to express your truth, when you begin to want more, need more, expect more, they pull away, not because you did anything wrong, but because your expansion threatened the balance of their comfort zone. And when that happens, the temptation is always the same. Shrink back down. Return to the smaller version of yourself that was easier for them to accept. Dim your light just enough so that it doesn't make them squint. Numb your feelings just enough so they don't feel inconvenienced, but doing that will only lead you to resentment, because deep down you'll know they don't really love you. They love the version of you that makes them feel safe and superior. Fitting into someone else's comfort zone often means stepping out of alignment with yourself, and no amount of external validation can make up for the internal disconnection that causes. You weren't put on this earth to be palatable. You weren't meant to live a half life just to keep others from feeling insecure. Your boldness, your ideas, your feelings, your voice, none of it is a mistake, and the people who genuinely care about you will never require you to shrink for their comfort. They won't ask you to edit yourself to be lovable. They'll want the whole of you, not just the parts that are easy to digest. But it takes courage to stop shrinking. It takes strength to hold your ground when someone tries to put you in a smaller box. It takes self-respect to keep expanding, even when it means outgrowing relationships, spaces, or identities you once clung to for safety. And yes, it might cost you some people. It might change the dynamics of your life in uncomfortable ways. But what you'll gain is far more valuable. You'll begin to feel the weight lift. The energy that once went into staying small will return to you. You'll remember how it feels to speak without fear, to take up space without apology, to live aligned with who you really are, not just the version of you others preferred, because shrinking may feel like safety at first, but it's a safety that demands your silence, your compromise, your invisibility. And that isn't living, that's hiding. So no, you don't need to be less just because someone else hasn't learned to be more. Don't water yourself down to match someone else's shallowness. Don't dim your fire to make others feel warm. Don't step out of your own light just because someone else prefers the shade. The world doesn't need a quieter you, it needs a truer you. There's a moment in every relationship, romantic or otherwise, where you start to feel the weight of asking. You ask for time, you ask for effort, you ask for honesty, presence, reassurance. And when those things don't come easily or consistently, you begin to wonder if maybe you're the problem, maybe you're too needy. Maybe your expectations are unrealistic. Maybe what you want is just too much. But that doubt doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from being met with silence where there should be dialogue. It comes from inconsistency that leaves you walking on eggshells. It comes from small moments of emotional absence that add up to something you can't ignore. And as you sit with that growing discomfort, you start questioning the value of your own needs. You start rewriting your instincts. You begin to confuse disappointment with self-blame. What you might not realize in those moments is this: it's not that you're asking for too much, it's that you're asking the wrong person. Some people simply aren't built to offer emotional availability. Not because they're bad people, but because they've never had to be accountable, because they've learned to survive on shallow connections, because they fear depth, vulnerability, or the pressure of real intimacy. And when they encounter someone who wants more truth, more consistency, more emotional clarity, they feel overwhelmed, they pull back, they call it drama, they call it pressure, they call it too much. And yet, there's a version of you that tries harder when they pull away. That leans in when they retreat, that tries to explain, to justify, to beg for clarity where there should have already been effort. You think, if I could just say it differently, maybe they'd understand, or if I make it easier for them, maybe they'll show up. But you shouldn't have to translate your heart into a language that someone refuses to learn. It's not your job to teach someone how to value you. It's not your responsibility to become more convenient just so someone doesn't feel challenged. And it's certainly not love when the only way to keep someone around is to expect less of them than you truly need. Some people have grown used to relationships where emotional labor is one-sided, where minimal effort is enough to keep things going, where surface-level connection is all that's ever expected. So when you come in asking for eye contact, truth, reciprocity, and real emotional presence, it's not that you're asking too much, it's that you're asking things they've never had to give. They confuse your standards with demands, but standards are not demands. Standards are reflections of self-worth. They say, "This is what I know I deserve." When the right person hears what you're asking for, they don't flinch. They don't mock it. They don't disappear. They don't call you needy. They lean in. They listen. They try, even if they don't get it perfect the first time. Because to the right person, your needs don't feel like burdens. They feel like invitations, opportunities to show up, opportunities to grow. But when you're with someone who can't meet you, every request becomes a negotiation. Every emotional need becomes an inconvenience. And eventually you stop asking, not because your needs went away, but because you learned that asking only led to rejection. That's how people end up silencing themselves in relationships. That's how resentment builds. That's how people start feeling invisible in their own lives. You weren't asking for constant validation. You weren't asking for perfection. You weren't asking for something unreasonable. You were asking for connection, effort, honesty, things that should be the starting point, not the stretch. But when you ask those things from someone who's emotionally unavailable, the answer will always make you feel like you're asking too much. It's a hard truth, but sometimes the problem isn't what you're asking for, it's who you're asking. You don't need to shrink your needs to stay in someone's comfort zone. You don't need to numb your instincts just to maintain peace. You need to remember that your emotional clarity is a gift. Your voice, your boundaries, your desire for something real. That's not something to apologize for. That's something to protect, and maybe what you're really looking for isn't too much at all. Maybe it's just waiting for the right person to hear it and say, I've been waiting to meet someone who asks for exactly this. There are parts of you that you've questioned for years. The way you love too deeply, the way you feel everything so intensely, the way you speak up when something doesn't feel right, the way you want more connection, more honesty, more depth. Somewhere along the way, someone looked at those parts and told you they were flaws. Maybe they didn't say it outright. Maybe it came in the form of silence when you opened up, or eye rolls when you shared something that mattered to you, or withdrawal when you asked for what you needed. And so, piece by piece, you started to doubt yourself. You wondered if being less would make people stay longer. If you toned down your excitement, maybe they wouldn't say you're too much. If you stopped asking for clarity, maybe they wouldn't call you needy. If you didn't show how deeply you care, maybe they wouldn't take advantage of your heart. Over time, you began to confuse rejection with truth. You mistook someone's inability to receive your love for proof that your love was wrong. But what if the issue was never you? What if those qualities weren't the problem? They were just misunderstood. What if the very things someone once criticized are the exact things someone else is out there praying to find? There are people who will meet your emotional depth and feel at home, people who will listen to your passion and see it as power, people who won't ask you to shrink, they'll ask you to rise. The right people won't be threatened by your truth, they'll be drawn to it. They'll see your vulnerability not as weakness, but as a rare kind of strength. Somewhere there is someone who will love how you speak your mind, who won't flinch when you set boundaries, who will admire the way you care, the way you show up, the way you don't settle for halfway love. Someone who won't make you feel like a burden for wanting consistency. Someone who won't need you to dim your light just so they can feel like they're glowing. You've likely spent time with people who made you feel like you were always too intense, too emotional, too ambitious, too honest. But in the right presence, those same qualities become gold. What was once too intense becomes passion. What was too emotional becomes self-awareness. What was too ambitious becomes vision. What was too honest becomes refreshing clarity. The right people will not only accept the parts of you that others rejected, they'll value them. They'll thank you for showing up as you are. They'll see your willingness to be real as rare and beautiful, not something to criticize or control. They won't make you feel guilty for needing reassurance. They'll give it freely. They won't punish you for speaking up. They'll appreciate your honesty. It's hard to believe this when you've only known the opposite. When past relationships or environments have conditioned you to stay quiet, stay small, stay agreeable, you learn to anticipate rejection before it even arrives. You start with holding your truth out of fear. You pretend your standards aren't as high as they are. You pretend your feelings aren't as strong as they feel, but it doesn't have to stay that way. So if you've ever felt the need to dim your light, apologize for your passion, or silence your truth just to fit into someone else's world, let this be your reminder. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who weren't enough to hold what you carry. Your depth deserves depth. Your honesty deserves truth, and your heart deserves to be met, not managed. Don't change who you are. Change where you're standing, because the right people won't ask you to be less. They'll be grateful you showed up as more. Thank you.